The British tech tree is a tech tree that has been subject to much debate. There are some that will argue that Britain is one of the best tech trees in game. Some will argue that, and I quote, Gaijin hates Britain. Another argument that the British tech tree has is whether it's a minor or major nation. There are some that use questionable criteria like player count to justify Britain being a minor nation despite Britain having more tech tree tanks than the United States, with Britain having 79 tech tree tanks and the US only having 72 as of update La Real. So if you think that Britain is a minor nation, then the US has to be a minor nation as well, which we clearly know is not. So with that in mind, we will start taking a look at why people would think Gaijin hates Britain and try to see if it's really as bad as people make it out to be. This video is themed as a response to the European Canadian's video, as I use a lot of his statements as jumping off points. Then we'll go to the usual pros and cons and rating the tech tree out of 10. I will also link the video in the description so you can see for yourself the entirety of the video and not just the salient points that I am quoting in this video. The first statement that caught my attention was when the European Canadian said Britain sometimes gets the short end of the stick. I mean, sure, but which nation hasn't gotten shafted at some point by the game? Even the beloved USSR gets shafted from time to time, such as when the T-90 dropped in new power, and it turned out to be a grossly mid tank with a gimmick so that they had to add more modern shells just to keep it at that battle rating. Or that time during Advancing Storm where T-64Bs were fighting Abrams tanks. Or that time radar missiles were added and MiG-21s were getting clapped out of the sky by AIM-7E Sparrows. You really can't quantify the idea that Gaijin hates a nation because it gets the short end of the stick sometimes, because you'd be falling into my belief that Gaijin hates all nations equally. Yes, Gaijin hates all nations equally, even Italy. Even though the Arietes have been reduced to fodder, Italy still has a better 9.0 lineup today than the US or USSR. But that is for another video. The second statement that piqued my interest is that Britain is lacking in meta vehicles. It goes on to say that the US dominates most battle ratings in aviation, and that Britain's win rate drops because some matches like to line them up with a less powerful nation against the quote, meta nations. Let me address that the US doesn't dominate most battle ratings in Air RB. They dominate at high tiers, yes, but at prop tier, the Spitfires 109s reign supreme. They have the P-51H, and that's about it. Maybe there's also the Yak that joins the Spitfires and 109s and reigning at prop tier, but that's about it. The Spitfire LF Mark 9 is single-handedly the best prop fighter at its battle rating, which is why the US and USSR premium variants are so desirable to acquire when they come out on sale. Then there's the Ezer Wiseman Spitfire, which is easily the best choice for a cheap premium plane for Israel. I mean, there's like only 4, to be fair, but the F-84F is bad, and the A4E is an A4E, it's not an Ayit. The Kafir Canard is, well, a Kafir Canard. He also goes on about naval, and that's fair. Moffats and Helenas are the most common fixtures in naval, along with the Prinz Eugen, but the Prinz Eugen is far, far more annoying because it's at 5.7. If the Prinz Eugen was 6.0 like the Helena, it would be facing 7.0 battle cruisers and battleships that would balance it very hard. But instead, it's at 5.7 where it gets to outrange 4.7 and 5.0 DDs all day. The Belfast at 5.7 I can understand. The Helena's HE just simply is that much better that allows it to stand up against battleships. I've played the Fargo and the Cleveland, and I understand why American 6-inchers are at 6.0 and the Belfast is only at 5.7. Anyways, sorry for that naval digression. Going back to his statement about Britain being paired up with weaker nations, I don't think that's the case. Maybe only for top tier tanks when the matches are USSR versus the world, but even then, that's screwing up every nation equally, except USSR. Then he gets into the meat and potatoes of the British tanks, namely their lack of HE filler in their AP rounds. When formulating an idea on how to tackle the Why Britain Suffers video, that's also the first concept that came to my mind. British vehicles have no AP filler, therefore suffering. But that's only an argument if you're playing War Thunder in 2016. AP shells fragment and sprawl against most opponents now. It's not like back then my experience playing a stock Bulldog in 2016, where shooting the side of a Panther D does nothing because it goes in one end and out the other with zero spalling. It does happen to me with the Comet APDS, but that's part and parcel of a subcaliber projectile from a small round. But what he neglects to point out is that while Britain, low tier, lacks HE filler that's apparently the meta, they make up for in reload speed. The Churchill and Cromwells have 6-pounders that have stock reloads of 5.2 seconds, while comparable vehicles in those BRs like the Panzer IV and M4 Shermans have stock loads of 7.7 and 6.5 seconds respectively. Yeah, maybe it does owe it to the smaller caliber of 57mm and that the 6-pounder's best APCBC has lower pen compared to the Panzer IV's APCBC. That's still won over the T-34 1941 and 1942, which not only have 8.9 and 8.5 seconds of reload, its best APCBC shell doesn't even crack 100 mil of pen, which is why even if the 6-pounder is a smaller shell, I still take it over the T-34 1941 or 1942. Of course, this is just being pedantry because 1941 and 1942 T-34s are really good vehicles and I really enjoy playing them. The same way I enjoy playing the Cromwell and the Shermans and the Panzer IV. Because, well, there's also a reason why I enjoy the Cromwell. It's a really fast tank. And comparing the Cromwell with the Shermans is moot because if you don't like Cromwells, well, Britain has a Sherman tank as well. At this point, he also goes into APDS and poor post-pen, while using the Comet as an example. But like I said, it's part and parcel of having a small gun with a sub-caliber projectile. Play the Roycat Mark 1D's APFS DS and see if it spalls as much as 105mm APFS DS. The 2S38 kinda gets away with it because it has such a high rate of fire that it can always make up for bad shot placement. The American and Japanese M41 is kinda in the same ballpark, which is why vehicles like the T-92 and German M41 are always more preferable thanks to having heat FS. I've been playing the Centurion Mark 1 and Mark 2 a lot recently and I've taught myself to always carry solid shot because APDS is really only there to disable internal parts or take out crew. He also talks about how the addition of France improved solid shot AP performance and how Britain's attention did not improve any ammunition. But one crucial thing that he misses is that APDS performance improved drastically thanks to the addition of Britain. Before Royal Armor, the 105mm L7 APDS had trouble penning the front plate of a T62 or T54 because of RNG, and Leopard 1s had to either buy the Hesh round or crawl their way to it. And this was before they reduced the requirements per row for modules. Honestly, I'm still paying for that with my Leopard 1's negative kill death because I had to die to so many T54s, T62s, Chieftains, and Type 74s before getting Hesh and finally getting my revenge. By the time I did get my revenge, they finally added the IT-1. Tough cookie. But yeah, the point is APDS was made viable thanks to the addition of Britain. And he even indirectly acknowledged this when he said 6-7 Britain was the best BR because of the Carnarvon, Centurion, and the FD-4-202. The last point I'd like to talk about is when he brings up the Javelin during Update Supersonic. That's a point I will concede on because the Javelin had so many issues going into the game that it was almost laughable when it was placed in the same BR as the MiG-19S and MiG-19PT. It also had a habit of wing snapping in level flight, which just added to insult to injury that is the meme of the Javelin. And then the wing-mounted 30 mils. The Javelin is basically the "it's so over" meme for a plane. But then he goes on to the Tornado when accentuating the idea that Britain is a nation that doesn't get good vehicles on launch. All the more forgetting that 6-7 Britain on the launch of ground tech trees was one of the best lineups in the game. The Black 7 being 5-7 on launch, and who could forget the Wyvern when it was launched. So, we've seen the European Canadians' points and what I think of them. What about me? What do I think of the British tree? Remember the Einstein quote, or whoever actually said that if you judge a fish by its ability to fly, it will live its whole life thinking that it's stupid? That's what I think about Britain. It's a decent tech tree in its own right, but a lot of criticism it gets is because it can't perform like other tech trees. Sometimes they're fair criticisms because they do face each other and the attributes they take with them decide how matches go. But sometimes they're criticizing British vehicles for some insane things, like the Tornado GR1 being garbage when it's the fault of battle ratings being so compressed that 11-3s don't get any breathing room. A problem that's existed since the MiG-17 and Hunter F1 were around. Now if you were to ask me, all Tornado IDS variants should be at 11.0 like the one that Germany has, the Event Marine Flieger Tornado. But that problem existed since, the MiG-17, because if 11.3s are unplayable, that's because 12.0 exists, and that's the problem since the MiG-17 and the Hunter F1 were around. Remember when you could never play 8.0 aircraft because it's almost always 9.0 matches? Yeah. Oh, and the Venom is still 8.7. But 8.7 has changed over the years. A full BR up tier means you can face R60s from the Yak 38s, A90s from the Hunter F58, and F104s you can never ever catch. At top tier, the Challenger 2 suffers, but with KA50s and T80 BVMs, honestly, who doesn't? There are inherently problems that the vehicle is not at fault in. Sure, they're slow, but if you're playing Britain at top tier, you already know that mid or the cap point is the last place you want to be. You have poor survivability because you have 2-piece ammunition. The charges detonate. You don't have the reload time to back it up, and you don't have the mobility to back out of a bad situation. Okay, so let's sum up the British tech tree with its pros and cons. The pros of the British tree is that they have consistent performance across their tanks and aircrafts. They have decent lineups and overall good support lineups for the more meta nations. They're rarely a nation that gets to shine on their own, but when you get a friend who plays the US or Germany and squad up, both of you are in for a really good time. The cons of the British tech tree are that they're always out of the meta, and that's for better and for worse. For better, they get APDS far earlier than most trees, but it's low caliber APDS that is often worse than solid shot AP. For worse, a top tier challengers are slow and bulky, and that's often to its own detriment. Another one is the Stormer HVM, which is the only Sackloss SAM with no proximity fusing. Watch me play that thing at 200 ping, which I always do. Another downside of the British tech tree is that they have better premium vehicles than tech tree vehicles. The Centurion Mark II is their best 6.3 vehicle, and that's a Battle Pass vehicle. The Challenger DS is a faster Challenger Mark III. The Hunter FGA-9 is also an upgrade over the F1, and I might be stretching, but also the F6, since the SRAMs are also a struggle bus to play now. And the Black Prince still has no peer. I mean, even across tech trees, the British are still struggling with their premiums. Germany gets a Seahawk, but Britain doesn't get the Sidewinders. I mean, yeah, the Seahawk is a tech tree vehicle, but Germany's premium is a Seahawk with Sidewinders. If I were to rate the British tech tree out of 10, I would give it a solid 6.5. The British tech tree can be workable, sometimes even fun at some bursts, but even I have to admit that I've had my fair share of frustrations grinding out tech trees with it because I simply can't do more because it wouldn't benefit the British playstyle. The Tornado F3 is fun in short bursts, but when you're stuck in a missile joust with an R27ER, just J out. Though, if I ever wanted to grind something with Britain, I'd recommend the lineup of the Challenger DS, Challenger Mark II, Challenger Mark III, G-Lynx, and the Jaguar GR1A, and the Stormer HVM, and just sticking it at that battle rating. The occasional 11.0 up tiers are gonna suck, especially with the Stormer HVM fighting KA-50s, but the Black Hole is strong enough to sometimes give you a lot of 10.3 and 10.0 down tiers. So that's what I thought about the European Canadians video and my takes on why Britain suffers. I still haven't made my mind up about which nation to do a video about next, but it might be the United States due to the amount of Abrams I've been playing recently when they let tanks research helicopters. Once again, this is the Dr. MD. Thank you for watching and Godspeed.